Hi, everyone. Welcome to a new episode of Carolyn Talks. I am your host, Carolyn Hines, and this is the podcast/YouTube channel where I speak to film creatives about their work, their latest productions, as well as their experience in the film industry. And today I am joined by filmmaker Christina Kallas to speak about her newest film, Paris in Harlem, which was selected for the breakout category at the Slamdance Film Festival, which is a part of the 2022. I have to remind myself that we're in 2022 now. Sundance Film Festival. So I'll ask Christina just to say a bit about herself first and how she got into filmmaking, and then we'll discuss the film. So Christina?
Oh my God, I got into filmmaking so many years ago. I don't know where to start. But my background is screenwriting. So that's what I started with. That's how I got into filmmaking. And I've lived in a lot of countries. I'm Greek. And I lived in Berlin for many years, and then I moved to New York, and I lived in New York for many years, where I'm based now. And basically, I started directing when I moved to New York. This is my third feature film, and it's part of a trilogy that we call my New York trilogy, or Love Letters to New York trilogy. And the first two are 42 Seconds of Happiness, which is on Tubi now, and the second one is The Rainbow Experiment, which is on Paramount Plus. And I'm really happy that I managed to finish the trilogy. I basically shot Paris is in Harlem. It's Paris is in Harlem, and I basically shot it a month before the whole thing went down with the pandemic and everything closed down. And then my friend Sam, which is the owner of the Paris Blues, on which the character of Sam in the movie is based, he died. He was one of the first victims of COVID-19 in April 2020 in New York. So it's kind of a miracle that we actually finished the film, and that's now 2 years later. We're premiering it, and we're doing it online, which is how festivals are happening now, right?
Yeah, so I did see the dedication at the end of the film. So his last name, it was Hargrass, right?
Right.
Yes,
Hargrass Jr. Yeah.
Right. So first of all, my condolences, and I'm sorry that he passed. So that before seeing the film, because the film is a love, it's, as you said, it's a love letter to New York, but it's also a love letter to his bar, which is Paris Blues. So the fact that you were able to finish it just before, I think it's a great tribute to him and to New York and to the location. And the thing with this film that I think is interesting is that it's not linear narratively, and it runs like a conversation between different characters. So it's centered around 7 different individuals. And it reminded me of, we say 6 degrees of separation, where like you can meet someone today and they are connected to you by 5 other individuals that you never knew who the people that you meet, who they are connected to. So can you just tell me first of all about structuring the story this way, and how it ties into the previous 2 films, because I haven't seen the other 2 films, but since it's a trilogy that you were able to complete, because not many trilogies get completed in very close timelines. Sometimes it can take 10-20 years for a trilogy to be completed. So can you just tell me about this, creating the story narratively like this, because it's very different?
Yes. Well, there are 3 different films, and there are 3 different stories. But what connects them all is there are certain characters that are in all 3 films. So, for instance, the character of Sila is in all 3 films. The woman who wants to end her life with. I don't want to. I don't know how much of that I'm spoiling by talking about. It's like in the nature of this, right?
You can spoil however much you want to spoil. I'll follow your lead with regards to that.
So she was in 42 Seconds of Happiness, and she was also in the Rainbow Experiment, but it's not the same character. It is as if, you know how it is sometimes in life when we say, oh, I wonder how my life would have gone if I had decided to stay with this guy, or if I had decided to become, I don't know, a lawyer, or if I had decided to move to LA, or, you know, we sort of have this moment in life where we have to make a decision, and then we make a decision and we wonder all lives how it would, I mean, at least I do. So this is what happens with these characters. They're like, as if they make a decision in a certain moment, which kind of creates a new universe. So these films are very different stories, but they're also parallel universes for these characters. So they have certain elements that are sort of similar. They are the same, you know, they have the same vibe as characters, but something they're with different people, they have children or they don't have children, or whether some they sort of, you know, they have a different job, and, you know, all those things change. So this is how the trilogy sort of connects, apart from obviously New York and that whole sense, you know, I'm in love with New York. I love New York. I think New York is, I mean, for me, like a culturally fluid person who doesn't belong anywhere, I feel like I belong to New York. So, you know, I made those 3 films in the last 6 years to kind of express that love and among other things. Yeah, where was I? Oh my God, yeah, I think I deviated and I don't know where I am now. What was your initial question? Did I answer your question?
No, you were actually answering the question, because I asked about where you got the inspiration for creating the story. Like, it doesn't follow, it's not linear, as I said. Like, it follows different characters, and it stops in one spot, and then it kind of tracks back and goes further back into where another character begins, and then eventually they all line up at the end. So it's like it's like converging universes, as you said, coming at the same time, because like for every individual, like each person's, because this one is basically a day, it's like a day in the life of these people, and like everyone has their own path, but then at the end of the day they all end up in one location. And the way how that, and so you were answering your question, because you were saying that you wrote it as a way, as an homage to the city, and like you didn't feel like you belong anywhere, but you feel like you belong to New York. And I think that's kind of the same thing for a lot of people who live in especially urban cities. And like for me, the way I was thinking of it is like living in, I don't live in like downtown core of Toronto. I live in the suburbs. I live in what's considered the suburbs, but it's not like posh suburbs. It's not like house. Like I live in an apartment building, and like I just take a bus and a train, and I'm in the heart of downtown Toronto. But it made me think of like how you can get on a train with someone at the beginning of the day, and everyone gets up and they go and do their own thing, and then at the end of the day you see the exact same people in the same train car as you getting onto the same bus, and you're all going in the same direction, and you're all ending up in the same basic proximity of location, you know, where you live. And it kind of like makes me think about how like everyone's day is so different, but then it also is also at the same time the same. Like we get up, we wake up, we have breakfast, we leave, and we go to work, we do whatever our jobs is, we do what, if you go to school, whatever it is you're doing your day. But then in the day, you got to get on the train again, get back on the bus, and you go home, do your chores at home, wake up, do the same thing over and over again. And it's so that's what kind of what the film reminded me of, like all of these infinite possibilities of everyone's day, but then there's some things that are just finite, like just like you begin your day and you end your day.
Exactly. And it is, you know, it's like I call it the collective protagonist, because, you know, most films, they have this thing of the singular protagonist, right? The hero. And that goes all the way back, you know, to sort of Greek drama and Greek tragedy, and it's this obsession with seeing everything concentrated, you know, on one storyline and one hero. And I find this very predictable. So I kind of, you know, for me, what is interesting is to sort of have this this convergence of different stories and different characters where they meet, where, you know, and also showing, I feel like, you know, the truth, you come closer to the truth if you can sort of accept sometimes opposing perspectives on one and the same thing at the same time. right? So this sort of absolute kind of black and white way of looking at things, there's good and there's bad, it's just not bringing us anywhere. We all have I kind of, I kind of like of seeing those stories as stories that sort of, the characters are driven by their emotions, by their emotional states, whether this is hurt ego or jealousy or insecurity or love, or and it's kind of, the film is sort of like an X-ray machine showing those emotions that connect them all and that connect us all. So yeah, so that's something that is very specific to my storytelling, that there's several characters and there's several perspectives and there's several storylines, and they all but there's also an overall story that has the suspense where you kind of that keeps you watching. And other than that, the specific thing here with this film is that I wanted to structure it like a jazz song. And that's why I shot the whole film with a Steadicam. So I wanted to have this long takes, the melodic parts, and then those staccato parts, the allegro parts, and then those split screens, which feel like the whole band is playing together, till one of the instruments starts the melody and takes it away. So that's a little bit the thinking or the goal that I had behind the structure of the specific film.
Mm-hmm. Right. So like there's a couple of things to mention that I want to get into. So one thing, I'll get into the structure because the structure of the film is very different. But one of the things you mentioned just now, what you said is like everything is in black and white, and like how our interactions with different people varies. So like we because how there's the saying, there's three sides to every story, your truth, my truth, and the real truth, right? And there's a situation in the film that kind of centers around that, and it's interesting because it centers around a male character who is filing a suit for sexual harassment against a female character. And that was interesting to me, not only because we don't often get to see that side of sexual harassment in film or in TV. Usually when the discussion of sexual assault or sexual harassment is brought up, is the perpetrator is a male. And in this case, the perpetrator is a woman. And the way how that kind of plays out is like we see the perspective of the victim, and he's reticent about pressing charges because he just wants to kind of wants to get it over and done with. He doesn't want to have to deal with the fallout. He's saying the person that harassed him was someone he considered a friend, so he's feeling pressured to go through with the claim. But then he's also feeling like, I'm betraying this person that I considered a friend. But then we kind of get the flip side of that, where the person, the harasser, who's the woman, she's a professor at a it's a university, right? It's a university.
Yes,
right.
There's a university close to that bar, and that's why there's a lot of the people that hang out there are either college professors or adjuncts and so on. So and she's a feminist. She is the chair of the women's studies in that university.
Right. So I thought it was really interesting because there's a discussion with her and another professor who's a member of the board, who's a Black woman, and she's talking about Title IX, which was a law that was created to protect against gender discrimination in educational institutions. And she's saying Title IX is for people like me. I'm a woman. I'm gendered, and I'm a gender minority. And she's saying, especially in this case, and it's not for people like me. And she's saying women can't be sexist. And I was like, yes, they can. and I'm like, women can't be sexual assaulters, women can be sexual harassers, women can be sexist. And then she kind of draws the comparison. It's something that comes back around later in the film, where she says, it's just like how, like Black people can't be racist. And I'm like, those are two completely different things. Like, so comparing sexism to racism is two completely different things, because it's about power structures, systematic and systemic, systemic and systematic power structures. And then there's sexism, which is about personal behavior, right? And I'm like, and like the fact that she's a professor, she's saying this. I love that you actually did that, because it shows how academics, people who think they know everything. People who think that who believe they think that because they're deep thinkers that they're always right, and that she's leaning very much on the side of logic. And I'm like, well, you're actually skewing the logic here because you're drawing a false equivalent. And I want to ask you about actually making this, including this particular storyline and having the characters be the type of characters they are, because the male victim, he works at a bar, so there is a power dynamic with regards to like position and hierarchy. And then also there's, I would also say, how society would view them, because society would be like, oh, she's educated, she's a woman that works at a university, she has her status, and he's just like working at a bar. And like there are people who would say, oh, and he's a man, so how could a man be a victim of sexual assault? So can you just speak a bit towards that?
Well, what I find fascinating is because we have this, it's a very strange moment in time in many ways, because we're sort of like waking up and looking at what we've been thinking and what we've been saying and what we've been talking about, and all those all those years, and I don't know, I mean, and realizing, oh my God, how close we were, or how much we were actually not conscious and not aware of so many things, and there's a good side to that because we're becoming very aware. There's a bad side to that because there's virtue signaling. There's this idea that I'm above this, and I think when the character says, I'm a feminist. Sorry, I shouldn't say these words on your, but I fought for, just beep it out. I fought, I fought for Title IX. And if I weren't there, Title IX wouldn't exist, which is probably right, and but at the same time, this means that, this can sort of come back if you do, there's other things, it sort of evolves further. So I think her shock is not only that she's a woman and she's been accused of that, but also that she's a feminist and she's been accused of that. She's a professor of women's studies. She's an intellectual. And I like those games of reversal, because I think that if you play that reversal game, then you bring the conversation on the right level and you can actually talk about what this is about. Because otherwise it's like all women will say, oh, I'm a victim and this is the perpetrator. And then we're not going to have this conversation. So in a way, I kind of, I'm capturing a moment in time. And it's this moment in time where we're all a little confused. And we're definitely opening up something which is finally, we're talking about certain things and addressing certain things, but we're also discovering our limits, right? And we're also discovering the confusion, and we also don't know all the answers. So I'm kind of, sort of posing questions. I wanted to sort of put on the table as many questions as possible. And have that conversation in a way between the characters, but also between the audience and the film and the audience between each other. So that's something that that's the intention behind actually looking at identity wars, which is a very concrete thing, and also looking at this whole concept of cancel culture. And this in a story, which is on the day when this horrific law, which was considered, New York's darkest secret, because nobody knew about that. When I discovered it, I was going around telling it to all my New York friends, and nobody has heard about that law, which, enabled mayor after mayor to be closing bars for different reasons for 91 years. And that was, that was like the cancel culture in itself, that law. It was something that was used to sort of cancel so many, the culture of multi-race, multiracial mingling, and the culture of gay clubbing, and I mean, everything that all waves, of nightlife in New York. It was that tool that was used against it. So in a way, that's like the thematic foundation of all those very personal stories ultimately. And looking at the reversal, looking at someone who has the best intentions, who has probably the right set of mind, who is absolutely conscious, who understands how things work, who is on the right side of history, and then this thing happens, and she realizes, well, not everything is as I thought, and it's very difficult to navigate that.
Mm, right. And then there's the kind of like the flip side of that, because you're talking a little bit about perceptions, like how she perceived herself as well. But then there's also a character who's the Uber driver, how he perceives her, because he meets up with her purely by coincidence or serendipity, as some might say, because he found the car of the gentleman in his car, in the backseat, and she called, and he basically talked her down off the ledge, as you would say, because she was upset and she was crying, and like he finds her and he drives her where she needs to go. And I thought it was super interesting because she's upset and he's doing his best to calm her down. And in this sense, she almost looks, I wouldn't say like a victim, but she's sympathetic in the fact that anyone who doesn't know what the reason she's upset is going to think that the person that upset her is the person in the wrong, when it's actually not the truth. It's like she was basically calling the guy over and over and over, and he was just like, leave me alone. And it's just like, anyone that comes across her, like the Uber driver, is gonna say, oh, she's upset, she's a sympathetic character, let me show her sympathy. Whereas the other gentleman, because he's upset, but he's more angry, and he's like more like he's just frustrated, people would see the two of them very differently. So I want to ask you about that, because I think it's very interesting, because it shows how how people would say, oh, this person would never harm me because they've never shown me that side of them. But then there's the other person who's like the victim, is like, well, guess what? They've shown me the worst side of them, and that's the truth of that person that I know. So can you just talk a bit about that?
You mean comparing Ike, which is the guy, the bisexual barman, and the victim in this case, with Arthur, the Uber driver? Is that what?
Yeah.
Well, I think that I mean, in the one case, you have the Uber driver. He's a stranger. I mean, he's a stranger, and what is really, in a way, what's really interesting in his story, or what happens between the two of them, is that it kind of, what happens between them is the most intimate act that can happen, if you want, between two people that is the effort, that do not know each other, or that know each other, is the effort to persuade the other to choose life over death. And I think that's what is between them. And he's seen her in without having that knowledge of the past. And therefore, he's seen her much more, maybe with less prejudice. He's seen her as a human being in need. And there's something between them that, in a way, how this whole Indian story goes. If you save someone, then this someone is connected with you forever. And there's something between them that kind of involves that act between the two of them, and that is very different than Ike and her have a past together. So there's actually there's things that happen between the two of them where it's impossible to see each other without that past, or without that knowledge of the past. And that's something that is really sort of coloring that relationship in a very different way. And it's very difficult. People say, one should just forgive and forget and liberate oneself. That is not that easy. And it's absolutely acceptable, I think, to just be angry. And it's absolutely acceptable to just be sad. And I think that our culture is very much sort of pushing away emotions because I don't know why, it's not, it's emotions or something dirty or we shouldn't, and it's sort of pushing us through the hoops and without really allowing us time to process things. And in a way, sort of looking at those characters as they are with their real emotions is kind of liberating, I feel.
Yeah, I feel the thing is where people are like, oh, just forgive and forget. It's not about helping the person who's been harmed and hurt. It's about absolving the person who caused the harm or the hurt. It's about, okay, this whole situation is making me uncomfortable, so I need you to forgive them so that I no longer feel uncomfortable about the situation. And then it's also like absolving the person who caused the hurt without making them accountable for the hurt and harm they've caused. And that's why obviously people are like, oh, forgiveness is for the person who's been hurt. I'm like, no, it's not. Forgiveness is more beneficial to the person who caused the hurt because you're not allowing the person who was hurt to sit in that hurt and to feel it and to express that hurt, because you need to acknowledge it. Because when you don't, that's when you actually cause more hurt, like years on down the future. Well, everyone says move past. The person who never really got the apology they wanted, who never got the justice they deserve, they are still dealing with the consequences late, like years on down the road. And that's the kind of the situation that's happening now, where like if Ike doesn't get the resolution that he wants for himself, like it can cause him issues like way beyond like the present. But a lot of people don't think about those situations. They don't think about the future. They're just thinking, oh, I'm uncomfortable now, so I need you all to deal with this right now.
Right. Yeah. I think we are a little bit too worried about being uncomfortable. It's okay to be uncomfortable. It's part of life. It's part of, we sometimes have to deal with uncomfort and discomfort to be able to process things, right? Yeah.
And another part of there's two other situations, but I'm gonna discuss one now that kind of ties in immediately, and that is with, like, we talked about Sela and that situation. But like, as I mentioned, there was a character that she said she used the line, oh, like women can't be sexist, like how Black people can't be racist. So like that kind of comes back later in the film, where she kind of challenges the same person. She's like, if there was a war, or if there is if there is a situation where you have to choose between fighting on the side of Black people or fighting on the side of women, who would you choose? My immediate reaction was like, I'm gonna fight for Black people, because Black women aren't Black women are Black people, right? And whereas you use the general term of women, like that encapsulates like white women, Asian women from different diasporas and different ethnicities. And I'm like, the situation that you're discussing right now is about Black people and like, so it's like, I want to talk about that because that's interesting, because that's something that we've seen mentioned a lot on in like I've had that discussion in real life, and then it's a situation that occurs a lot on social media, and it's about making, I think, especially Black women choose sides in a situation where it's just like, why should I have to choose a side? I'm a woman and I'm also Black. And like I've had to tell people before, I'm a Black woman before any and everything else, because that's who I am. That's my identity. When people see me, they're going to see my skin color as well as my gender first. Like my gender and my skin color are intertwined. Like I can't separate one from the other. So I want to ask you about that scene, and also playing as the creator one, but then also having that scene played with the actresses. Like, can you just tell me like their reactions to the scene and like what discussions you had while they were filming?
Yeah, well, I have a very different process just because of moments like that, because I'm kind of, I have all those multiple landscapes of characters, the collective protagonist, and they're extremely diverse. Like, life is diverse, the world is diverse, but I come from a very concrete corner of that whole landscape. I mean, I'm Greek. I lived in several countries. I lived in several continents. As a Greek, I have experienced a kind of looking down at me as coming from Southern Europe. When I was in Northern Europe, I have experienced being a woman. But there's certain other experiences that I haven't had, right? So it's something which, you know, being aware of that, but having also the desire to sort of capture that you know, diverse group of people, because that's what my world looks like. That's how, you know, where I live, that's what it looks like. You know, it's just all around me, and I love that. And I'm very, you know, I have a process which kind of means that, you know, I write a screenplay and then I workshop the screenplay the same way that we do it in theater with a play. So I make sure, you know, the actors that my ensemble, you know, and I usually put together my ensemble for each film long before we actually shoot. I kind of walk them through their lives before the film, before the scene in the film, before the scenes, before their story in the film. So instead of me telling them that's what happened to you, I have them kind of, you know, walk through everything that happened to them. So for instance, Sela and Ike, they had, you know, they met each other for the first time. There was, you know, that love story. They all experienced it in the room, you know, when we were working together. The two women, you know, they experienced the time when, you know, there was the interview between the two of them, you know, then she was chosen, then she was the mentor to her and all that. So I kind of build those relationships. And what happens is that the characters have this lived in, they have the, you know, they have the lives in their in the DNA, and they also have this trust with each other. So it's not something that comes out of nowhere. So I'm sort of, you know, that's the only area where it's possible, because it's a very safe space where it's possible to go to the limits of what we say to each other, you know. And that's you know, as you name, I mean, you're naming all the areas which, and I mean, we can talk also about the Indian adjunct professor and the Spike Lee films and all that. You know, the film is full of such awkward, uncomfortable situations. This is like, you know, it's full of those moments, right? I just, you know, I just wanted to make sure that they are emotionally truthful, right? So that is something Michelle, the character of the Black woman, yes, she answered like you answer, right? And I had to make sure that this is how she would answer, because if I put in the script that she says, I'm a woman, first of all, which is probably what a white woman would say, if she were asked the same question, she wouldn't go for, oh yeah, I'm for the whites. No, yeah. No way, right? There's no sense of solidarity, you know, there towards white people. So I assumed that this is what she would answer, but I needed to make sure that that would be true. So this is what I'm doing in the workshop. I'm just making sure that every situation is authentic, that it's truthful, that it really resonates. And if I find out that one thing that I imagined in a certain way is not that way, then I'll write it out of the script. So I kind of, it's like a proofreading process, you know what I mean? But much deeper.
I wish more directors did that, because as soon as you watch things, I'm just like, really? No one is saying that.
Yeah. I suffer sometimes watching stuff like this. So I'm kind of, you know, I think it needs, I think, you know, I think storytellers have a duty, you know, they have like it's a really serious thing we're doing, because we're creating reality, you know. If we keep showing certain things in a certain way, then they become reality. And that's a very, very heavy weight to carry. So I just want to make sure that it's emotionally truthful. That's, you know, that's the thing.
Right. And so another situation that I wanted to get into, because it does tie a lot of the, like, as I'm like we met that we were talking about, they like all of these characters, they're living their different lives and each one is having a different experience. But as I kind of said in the beginning, is like 6 degrees of separation, where all of the discussions that are being had are have very similar threats. You know, they have very similar themes. And like you mentioned just now, the adjunct professor who is Ben. So his situation, that one was again interesting. This is a word I use a lot, but forgive me, people. It's one of my favorite words. Where he's a professor and he's being challenged. He's being reprimanded because he used the N-word in a class because he's talking about Spike Lee's "Do the Right Thing." And he's saying that, oh, I used the word because it's about a teaching moment and it's about the intent behind it that Spike Lee as a creator had when it was uttered in the film. But then I'm like, as again, in my head, I'm thinking, first of all, Spike Lee is black. You are not. Second, when the character says that a character is speaking to black characters, he's speaking to the black audience. He is not speaking it with regards for anyone else to repeat the same phrase to be used against up to black people, especially as a young black woman. So, and the thing it was a young black student. So I want to ask you again about that because he said something that I was just like, yeah, I can actually hear people say that, where he was like, oh, but she's not like the professor who's in charge of the disciplinary committee. He's like, well, she's an African American student, and he's just like, well, she's not African. She's not African American because she's not African and she's never been to Africa. And neither have her parents. I'm like, semantics one. And I'm then also it's just like you're also I'm like it's interesting because like you're talking about the meaning of do the right thing to black audiences and to the film culture, while you're also discrediting the reasons black Americans call themselves African American. It's about it's about reclaiming the history of the diaspora. And I'm just like that's like there's a whole host of things going on in this one scene. And it's interesting how you kind of set him up before and afterwards, because he seems kind of a bit belligerent and like he gets annoyed about things very easily, and that kind of comes across in the scene where they're having in the same university they're having a lecture about gun violence situations in schools and universities. And is that you're talking about different types of violence. So like one situation is talking about physical violence, which is the gun violence, and then the other situation directly involving him is about I would what's the term I'm looking for? Is verbal violence, but it's a type of violence where he's being antagonistic towards a student and he's being like people would say racist. And that's so can you just also talk about that and including that in the storyline? Because like all of the different discussions you have, I'm just like, how did she come up with pick all of these different situations to include in this one film? So just talk about that.
Well, I mean, Carolyn, I have to say first that I am a film professor, as you know, my sort of day job, because as a filmmaker, it's you need also something on the side. So I teach film as well, right? Exactly. I mean, make independent films. Hello. So I teach film, and I've always been, and this is something I'm really passionate about cinema. So it's not just a day job. It's actually a passion as well, because it's sort of I've always been a film scholar, and I'm a PhD in film studies. So I've always been a film scholar and a filmmaker at the same time for as long as I remember. So I write books about film and essays about film and all that, and at the same time I'm making films. So this is something that a lot of the situations in the film are things that come out of my own experience, things that I everything that happens is copy. So this whole conversation, the whole idea of identity wars, whether it is in the whole question about pronouns, or whether it is the racist conversation or the sexist conversation or whatever, it has started much earlier in the academic environment than in the world outside. So I've been having those conversations and situations in the academy, like 6 years ago, when I first came to the US, even 10 years ago, and coming as a European to the US and having a different set of eyes, sort of seeing things from the outside without having that history and also prejudices, maybe. I was taught history in a European school. I wasn't taught history in the US, so it's very different. And you can, that's sometimes helpful because you can observe things from the outside. So those are all, that's the answer to the question, where does this all come from? It's things that I've been sort of really collecting, in the last years, to show all those wars between people and this sense of, these conversations about identity that we've been having and we're having, we're in the middle of it. That's the, I mean, and they're everywhere. So even this gun scene, where the security officer is basically showing them and telling them how to survive if there is a shooter in school, which is unfortunately, a very normal situation in American schools. And we do get this kind of lecture and drill. Even that culminates in a fight about semantics, in a fight about, it's always a white male, the violence comes always from a white straight male. And then there's somebody else who said, no, there were also black shooters. Yes, really, but who was it? Well, there was also a woman. There was a woman. And, so there's all this conversation is sort of, it's not about the gun violence anymore. It's about, again, identity. The Spike Lee scene, it's interesting as well because he's Indian. So, when I was working with this actor, and he's someone that I know, I mean, he's been in my previous films as well for many, many years, and a dear friend. And I know that he has suffered growing up as an Indian boy who is very dark, in the States, and, trying to figure out who he is and what he is and how he should be dealing with that. So I think, what was interesting to me was to capture this shock that he felt, again, that he may have gone, he may not be understanding something there. He may not be really understanding what the issue is, and his emotional reaction to not being able to understand. And specifically with the Spike Lee film, it's because, it's, as a film scholar, he basically quotes a piece of dialogue, and it's from School Days, and that scene is exactly about the thing they're talking about. It's exactly about the thing that this scene is about. So that's something which kind of he stops being able to understand that, and anger and being able to deal with this. He just feels like he's been put in a corner and he's been discriminated, and that's where he, his emotional situation comes from.
Yeah, because the thing is like that scene, and that's something that I know has happened in real life, and it has happened. I've seen it happen myself at school.
Right? Carolyn, it's insane because I've been sitting with this story, with this script for I don't know when it was the first draft that I wrote. And then the last 2 years I've been editing with my editor, Waldo Baptiste, and he's a black person, and he's really amazing. He's done all Patrick Wang's films, and he's become a really close friend in the process, because if you work that closely with someone, and he keeps sending me, after we finished editing, every day he sends me a story on that, this thing that's in our film happened in real life. Look at this, it happened in real life as well. So, he's kind of collecting all those real life stories that are actually happening. and that are very reminiscent of what is happening in the film. You know, I mean, just on a side note, do you remember, because it's a joke between us, do you remember this scene where, you know, the musician has a mask? That's Tomoki Sanders, who is playing the, you know, they meet in front of the university.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, he's wearing a mask. And, you
Mm.
know, I know that, you know, I mean, that's the first thing that people notice, and like, oh, you shot during the pandemic. No, this was before the pandemic. You know, he's half Asian. You know, that's he's the son of Pharoah Sanders, who is like a legend in jazz. I think he's the most famous jazz musician at the moment and alive. So he's used to wearing a mask. He's wearing a mask, or he goes around wearing a mask. And that's kind of, you know, people say it was in the air, you know, it was in the air.
The thing that, so like you said, it's a side note, but like the thing with the whole mask situation, and like we're not even going off on tangent because it's in the film, is like I'm in Toronto. I live in Canada. Where I like, so Toronto is an extremely multicultural, multi-ethnic society, and like where I live particularly, and where I worked when I worked at the school I worked at was predominantly Asian, which is predominantly East Asian and South Asian students, and like what's seeing people walk around in masks like was like is everyday occurrence. Like people would wear masks like if to prevent someone from getting a cold, you know. Exactly, so like that's standard. I watch a lot of Asian content. I watch a lot of East Asian films and dramas, like, you know, Korean, Japanese, Taiwanese, and they wear masks daily. And the reason part of the reason is like for that is like because they're considerate of not making other people get sick. And like if someone has a cold or the food, they wear a mask so other people get sick, but also because of air quality. So like, you know, like China and South Korea in particular, they have microdust, so they have like bad air quality. And so they wear the mask so they don't get sick and they don't get infections from the microdust. They have HEPA filters. Almost every house and apartment has a HEPA filter to filter out the air quality. So like when people started complaining about wearing masks here, it was just like, what's the big deal?
Yeah, exactly.
Celebrities wear masks so like people can't identify them. Like it's an everyday thing. It's like it was like nothing. I'm like, why are you people complaining about? I literally no, I don't see a problem wearing a mask. It was not a hard transition. It was, you have to get accustomed to having your face covered because it physically feels weird. But I was just like, where are you people making such a big deal about wearing masks? I know people who are Muslim, women who are Muslim, and they were saying, we wear hijabs, you know, like there are people who wear niqabs, you know, to cover their face. And like they've been wearing niqabs for thousands of years in their culture for their religion. And you people are complaining about wearing a tiny little mask. Like this is an everyday occurrence for millions of people around the world. So, but yes, not to go off on tangent, but it's still relevant to the film. But yes.
Yeah. No, it's like, you know, it's like in the first scene where, you know, Ike says the future has already happened. You know, in a way, it's you know, it's how it sort of, you know, it sort of begins also with the future, and you know, it's kind of the way that the whole thing is structured is
right. So now we will get into the way how you have the film structure, the technical aspects of the film, because you talked a bit about you have the way how the film is, you have these squares, so like you have individual scenes and shots in squares. It kind of made me think of, you know, like Sesame Street.
Oh, okay. I don't know if Sesame Street has split.
You know, so Sesame Street used to have this segment Sundays that it's legit like how your film played out, where you would have like characters doing individual things, and you would see like a character would pop up in one square, and then like they'd walk across the scene and they end up in a different location, and they meet someone else, and that person in that location would drop down into a box. So like your film is very much like that, and I like how it's visual storytelling. So can you just talk about structure, because you said it's reminiscent of how it's influenced by how jazz is, and jazz is not very, as I said, linear. So like your storytelling is linear and jazz isn't linear. Like jazz, like it flows up and down, like the notes come back and go forth, and a lot of it depends on the rhythm of the musicians and what they're feeling in the moment. Like jazz can be very spontaneous, and some of the scenes are like that, like where it feels spontaneous, where you're like, oh, okay, I'm gonna switch to this person, let's go see what Ike is doing in this scene. Then it switches, let's go see what Michelle is doing in this scene. So just talk about first shooting, like organizing how you were gonna film these scenes, and like if you filmed it chronologically, and then and then also the process of editing them together so that everything flowed the way you wanted it to flow?
First of all, concerning the split screens, it's in a way, it's interesting. I've been doing this from the beginning, and I mean, there's split screens in 42 Seconds of Happiness, actually a little bit less, and then I was like, when I did it, and the way I did it, because split screens is a tool that has been used in cinema history before. It's not, I mean, Brian De Palma has done a lot of work with split screens, for instance, and so but it also hasn't been used an enormous amount of time, an enormous lot, because it was really expensive to do split screens with film. So it became easier to work with split screens once we switched to digital. That's one of the reasons. And the other reasons is because people tend to think, oh, I can't really follow all four screens at the same time. And that's what makes them interesting to me, because there's an interactivity with the audience. I mean, every time you watch the film, even myself, it's like you see more, because then you kind of see the left screen and the right bottom screen in connection, and you notice little things that you haven't noticed before. It's the same with the long takes and the background action. For instance, the beginning scene, which is one long take, and you have multi-layered sort of storytelling. So you can see also in the back the cop coming out of the bar and talking with the bar owner after the law was repealed, something that doesn't mean anything to you because it's the beginning of the film and you haven't seen the whole film. But later on, when we get to this scene, then we focus on them and we get to the same scene, but instead of going with Ike and Lorenzo, we stay with Mark and Sam. So there's a sense of, sort of interactivity there. And obviously you have no choice. As an audience member, you can't press a button and say, okay, now I'm going to follow Mark. It's not a video game, maybe, but it gives you this this illusion that you can sort of go in whichever direction you want. And that's something that is possible with split screens. It's possible with depth of field shots. It's possible with anything that kind of gives you more information than you would normally get. And it's challenging. It's challenging for the audience. Someone had said once, okay, it's very much comes from a female brain. And maybe they're right. Maybe it's the way that we kind of are. I mean, they say women are more multitaskers than men. Also, younger people are more multitaskers than older people, and it has something to do with the ability to sort of perceive certain things at the same time, and not just focus on one thing. And it's interesting because with my second film, The Rainbow Experiment, I traveled around the world. It was before the pandemic. I'm going to miss that now. Anyway, and I went to China. I was invited to a wonderful, amazing, huge film festival in the center of China that is sort of operating without any sort of involvement of the government, because it's so much, it's in the middle of China, and somehow they manage each year to do this amazing festival. And I was really worried because I was like, listen, this is overwhelming, even for an American audience member, because you have those four screens sometimes. How is a Chinese audience member who doesn't understand English and is going to have the subtitles in Chinese at the bottom of the screen on top of everything else? How are they going to actually be able to perceive all those complicated stories of 33 characters intersecting, sort of, they actually understood more than an American audience. And you know why? Because the Chinese learned to write in four squares. So they learned their alphabet in four squares. So they're very used to having this sort of scattered attention, or, sort of divided attention, and still perceiving the whole. And that was amazing to me. I love all those sort of, little details that kind of expand my universe. I was really amazed by that. And I think we're just conditioned to be concentrated on a single protagonist, on conflict, on a single story that has a beginning, middle, and end, that is told linearly. And I like to sort of, mixing things up a little bit, shaking things up a little bit, and sort of challenging what we think, what we think we know, and what we think we feel. Challenging the way we think and the way we feel, really, because this is kind of, this is interesting, and this is probably going to make us a little, grow and be able to discuss certain things on a different level.
No, for sure. Like for me, like I'm an immigrant. Like I'm like, and this is something I've started talking about way more recently than before. I'm originally from Barbados, and one of the things I love about being an immigrant, especially living here in North America, is that and especially living in Toronto, is that back home, like we were taught, like for history, we were taught world history. Like we were taught history about the Caribbean, we were taught history about North America, we were taught history about Latin America, Spain, Europe, like, so like I grew up learning about all of these different places around the world. And then the same thing with cinema, like Barbadians love movies. Like we would watch like movies from all around the world. And then moving here, especially as an adult, I moved here at the age of 29. I'm trying to remember. I've been here. Yeah. I moved here at the age of 29. So I moved here as an adult who worked in previous fields back home. I worked in the tourism industry. I worked for a university. I worked for the library and everything. And then coming here, I've had a pretty eclectic career path here too. But one thing I love about being an immigrant is that I get to experience the world different to other people, right? And then the same thing with watching films. I love watching films from around the world, and like that's one of the reasons I love speaking to filmmakers, because I get to gain a different perspective about how people see the world. And there is a difference, I think, to films like made by North Americans, especially North Americans who do not have an international perspective, or who do not have a world view of how the world works, especially, or even how America works, versus film makers like yourself who've come from another country, who immigrated to another country, and you worked with you've been able to see how film is done in other countries. Like you just mentioned China. I'm like, yeah, that totally makes sense to me, because and I would even say the same kind of applies to to Japan too, because of how they write. Like they write vertically coming down and then going across, and like their books are structured completely different. So like sometimes when you're watching films and stuff, you can see how that translates into film and to dramas, and it's the same way. So I love being able to talk to directors like you, who are able to like see things from a completely different perspective, and who are able to like be, I think, more open about how to craft stories. Like you said, like if someone told you something doesn't really work, it's not realistic, you drop it. And I'm like, yes, I wish more people would do that, because the way I always say, the way how people are portrayed on screen, it like affects how they're perceived in real life. And I don't think many directors even realize or even consider that the way how they show characters and situations on screen does kind of influence the way people relates to them in real life.
No, I mean that's totally the case. I mean that's I can see how I was influenced by cinema and TV growing up. I mean, where do you see the first kiss? Where do you see how people make love? Where do you see? I mean, there's so many things that you see first there, and then you imitate them because you think, oh, this is how it's done, right? And I think that's really, really, really important that there's some kind of, sort of checking in a way, and truthfulness, in what we do. I mean, you can never be absolutely 1000% sure that something is that that you're not making a wrong assumption, but of course, but at least you try. So yeah, especially if you're going to show a wider world and not stay with just your own cultural background, then you need to do that, right? I think so. So
Yeah, and so like I'm gonna start wrapping up on something now because we've been talking for a while. But one of the things I want to end off on is how the film ends off, and that's with regards to music, and like jazz has been a through line from the film from the very beginning, and it comes back around to the end, and like it ends off with all of these characters meeting up coincidentally at the bar at the Paris Blues Bar, and there's a situation where it could have been very tense and things could have gone very badly, but then it's almost like the film is talking about how jazz has been cathartic for so many people, how jazz, especially for I think for Black people, how jazz is a way and music is a way for Black people to like speak to everyone and to like get their emotions on if what they can't say verbally they say throughout their music. And that kind of happens I think with a lot of the characters in the film, where at the end the music, this jazz music that's playing is what communicates and connects all of them, like it speaks to all of them differently with regards to the situations they had. And it kind of like calms down, there's a term like music calms a savage beast. It's kind of like in I'm not calling anyone a beast, but it kind of works the same way, where like at the end of the day that everyone has had a bad day, but at the end of the day like they all can like connect to this music and connect to the singer, and they're all able to connect to each other, not positively, not negatively, because like, everything doesn't get started up, but it's just like for this brief moment in time like things do seem better. So can you just talk about ending the film this way, because I think it's important to especially for a film, especially with the, because we didn't get into all of the stories, but for all the stories that are being told, like to end on a positive note and to show that there is a possibility for things to always turn out better than we anticipate.
Right. Yeah. And that's really important to me. It's really important to me that, that we get the sense of at the end that, everything, I mean, the song is called Everything is going, everything is going to be all right. Mm-hmm. And it's, the song was written specifically for this film by Camille Thurman, who sings it. And it's that's the intention behind that. And I think that, it's interesting with music because a lot of the problems we have right now, and we've been talking about this past hour, have to do with language, because language is very limiting, I mean, it's like, and especially, I mean, we're not even talking all languages at once. So, I was raised in Greek. I mean, how can I can never really communicate perfectly because I don't have a language in a way, I'm sort of lost in translation. But language in itself is limiting because there's certain things that you cannot put in words. Mm-hmm. So cinema is a language that is a little bit more inclusive. Because it also uses other senses. It also uses to come closer to the human experience and the experience of the human condition, emotions, and so on, right, beyond language. And I mean, just to give you an example, there's this scene with, we didn't get to speak about it, but there's this scene with this white babysitter and the bar owner. And there's a moment where, she can't hear properly what he's saying. She just moves chairs and comes closer to him. And for me, this moment, this behavior of hers, this choice of hers is more about her, feeling that she can do anything she wants. Having that privilege, not being stopped, not being ashamed of just, taking what she needs to be able to understand, So than anything she could say. So that's why, in a way, the cinematic language is a little bit sort of advanced in relationship to the spoken language. On, beyond the cinematic language for me is music. And, my background is musician. So, in a way, I kind of, my films have that, I think they have more that musical structure thing than the strict sort of narrative, rational storytelling that people favor. So it's music is something that we cannot even grasp it. We cannot put it in words. We cannot describe it, but there's something that sort of can open us up, that that I try to capture in this last sequence of the film, where really it's the music that kind of resolves everything, because words have failed. Words failed us. And the music kind of, brings them together and brings them in touch with themselves, and allows them to sort of, have that almost surreal moment where they sort of, leave the bar altogether and, dance out into the into the horizon, so that's the intention behind that, and the power of music. Yeah.
Great, thank you so much. Yeah, the part music is the universal language, because it doesn't matter what language anyone speaks. Like when you hear the music, you can figure out what the musician is trying to tell you in the story of music. So I think that you can have that with a film. Like film is a visual language, and then music is the auditory language. So I love that you kind of connected both of them at the end of the film for that. Again, thank you so much for speaking with me, Christina. This has been great. This is amazing. Is there any, so the film will be, as we mentioned at the beginning, the film will be showing for the Slamdance Film Festival as part of the 2022 Sundance International Film Festival. Can you just say, do you know how audiences will be able to view? Because I know it'll be available on the platform for ticketing, right? Like you can purchase a ticket and watch it.
Right. Well, actually, it's even better. You can get a pass, and they are, for the whole festival, which is Slamdance is a very unusual festival in that it has this idea of celebrating cinema and cinema for all. So they really offer passes with which you can watch all the films in the festival for the 10 days that the festival is taking place. I think it's from the 27th to the 7th, 27th of January it starts. So the film premieres on the 27th, and it will be, you can watch it as many times as you want throughout that time, and you can watch other films as well. And that pass, I think, has a symbolic price of $10 or something. You can pre-order it already now on the website. There's because it's a virtual festival, because of Omicron, everything has gone virtual. So there's no screening times. It's like streaming, right? So you decide, okay, on Saturday, I'm going to watch Paris is in Harlem. Then you can go in, and with your pass, you just watch the film. I don't know if I don't think there's singular tickets. I think there's just this pass idea so that there's more opportunity. Even if you come to watch Paris in Harlem, since you have a pass, you may want to watch another film as well. So that's the idea behind it. You have a dog?
She's barking.
I have my cat in the other room, and he's meowing the whole time, like, come out.
I think he wants to go outside. This is so funny. Again, thank you so much for talking with me. This has been great. I appreciate you taking the time out of your day. I always wish the best for people, and I wish the best for you, because this is do you know what you're gonna do next? Because this is the end of the trilogy. Do you know what your next project will be?
Oh my God, yeah, I do have a passion project to do next, and we'll see what happens with that. I'm not gonna say much about that. Just that it's a love story, and it's called Caruso. Like the tenor, but it's not a period piece, and it's not about the tenor. It's about breathing. It's all I'm gonna say. So
story about breathing. That's interesting. Again, thank you so much, and I hope you have a great day. And I hope you even though we're doing the festival virtually, I still hope you have a good festival experience.
Thank you so much. And yeah, the downside is we're not gonna get to meet, but maybe in one of the other festivals that will be in person.
One day.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me, and I really enjoyed our conversation, and I'm really excited to talk further down the road once the festival is over. All right.
Yes, for sure.